Welcome to Recovery Corner, where the many pathways of recovery intersect. This is a space where you will hear personal stories of triumph in recovery, gain insights into various recovery-oriented systems, and learn how leaders across the country are building recovery-ready communities. The Recovery Corner podcast does not provide clinical advice.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I am here again today with my new friend, Amber, who we recently had on the podcast to talk a little bit about SoberLink, which she uses in her practice as a master addiction counselor. And on that conversation, I found out that Amber actually is a content creator herself. You are. And I took a look at her YouTube channel, put the shovel down, and it's, just some really fascinating stuff she's got on there. Lots of really cool resources for people struggling addiction, but even more so their families. So we're going to talk about some of that today. And I just want to give you a chance, Amber, to tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe like why you got into this work in the first place.
Well, I wish I had a better story. This is like the first question everybody always wants to ask me. And I'm always like, oh, like everyone else that's in recovery or in this field, they have like this fabulous story. And I feel like I don't have the best origin story. I'll tell it to you though. I come from a very addictive family. I'm not in recovery myself. That's usually the first thing people want to know. Mm-hmm. I come from an addicted family. My mom had a meth problem. My sister has always, like far as I can remember, had a meth problem. I've had several alcoholic grandparents, opiate, everything. Myself and my younger sister and I have one brother, and we don't have addictions, but that's it. Everyone else in the family is just like rampant. And the reason we don't is because we lived it, grew up in it, everywhere. So much so that I didn't even realize that I came from an addicted family until I was already in the field. Because I wish that was an origin story, like family, and I was so inspired, and then I got in the field. And it's like, no, like I got in the field sort of randomly and then realized I came from this crazy addicted family. Because when you grow up in it, it's like your norm, and you don't even realize that that's not other people's norm, right? Like you don't realize that not everyone like steps over people passed out on the floor to go to their job when they're 14. Or you just think that's the regular. So I ended up in the field just sort of almost like by accident. I went to school initially to be a school teacher, and I did that. Oh my gosh, that's really hard. Taught high school for 3 years. That's really hard. And then I went back to school to get my graduate degree. I thought I'd be a school counselor because that just seemed like the next logical thing, but I couldn't really afford to take off a whole year and intern as a school counselor because I was on my own. Like I had to pay my own bills. So I changed my major at the very last minute to community counseling instead of school counseling, so I could intern in the summer, and then I wouldn't have to miss work, and I could figure out how to make it all work financially. So they put me, and I got an internship, and they put me like in a chemical dependency IOP program. So that's kind of how I first got my feet wet in the counseling field. And then because I'd been a school teacher, this psych hospital I worked at, they were like, well, we want to have a chemical dependency program for adolescents. And since you've been a school teacher, you get adolescents, and we think you're the one for the job. So I'm like a baby brand new counselor. I know nothing. And they throw me in. They want me to create a program and run it by myself. Like this was like an evening program. I was like by myself in a room, a really squishy tiny room with like 15 drug addicted teenagers. And I mean, talk about being like over your head. Like, oh my gosh, like I was just like completely drowning. I didn't know what I was going to do. So everything I know about addiction comes from learning everything the hard way. People think they teach you that in counseling school. They don't. You take one class on addiction in counseling school on addiction, and the extent of it is we want you to sit in on some 12-step meetings, which I did, and tell us what that's like, which I did. But that's about it. Oh, and they teach you like the genetic disease model, which isn't even like relevant or even like, it's like disproven now. Wow. So like, that's all you get. So I'm in the room with these teenagers, and I'm just like figuring it out the hard way. And ultimately, I'm really glad that I did, because it made me have to come at the problem with really fresh eyes. Because typically in the treatment world, when you're around other people, a lot of people in the treatment world are in recovery, or even if they're not, they're working in it. And what you get is a lot of like, if someone's not doing well in treatment, what you get is a lot of attitude like, well, they just don't want it. Well, you can come back when you're ready. Well, that's on you. You know, we're here when you're ready. You know, you have this sort of like attitude that takes like no ownership of helping people, because it's just on them. They're just not ready. They haven't got them. You know, you hear all that kind of stuff. And honestly, because of my own just like personal insecurity, I'm in the room, I have all these teenagers, and I'm like, well, I don't want them to think I'm a bad counselor, which I was. I didn't know what I was doing. And so I got to keep these teenagers coming back. So I just want you to think for a second, because you're young people in recovery. So probably an idea, right? Like, we're dealing with teenagers, real life teenagers, most of which just got out of the psych hospital, like the inpatient part, for something big. Because I mean, like something big. And so like fully addicted, like needing detox or suicide or something, right? And so then they're in this outpatient program with me, which means, I mean, they don't want to be there. Come on. And then I don't know what I'm doing. We're just all in there looking at each other. And I got to figure out how to make these kids keep coming back in the room, because I don't want myself to look like I'm a bad counselor and they're not coming. So I felt like this intense pressure to make it work. And because of that, probably the very first thing I learned, and I did, some of this came from being a school teacher, is I learned to make them like the process. Like, I know that I can't make these kids stop using drugs like today, but if I can make this room, this group, a likable thing, then I can keep them coming back. And if I keep them coming back, eventually I might can figure out what to do. And so that's my origin story. Just like a drowning girl who didn't know what she was doing. That's me.
Wow. Well, you know, I feel like that's everyone's origin story in some sense. Like, whether you get here from having your own active addiction, or just, I mean, there's interaction with people in recovery and finding out that they're human, and just that heart to want to be of service. A lot of our chapter leads at YPR actually consider themselves allies, right?
Okay.
Like, you know, people who come from families of addiction or whatever, or just happen to have like a heart for service. And those people are some of our like greatest chapter leads. And I think it's a really like unique, interesting perspective in the whole world of recovery, you know, that like you don't have to have struggled with addiction yourself to help somebody necessarily. But we could do a whole podcast on that alone.
Oh my gosh, yes. I could just tell you all the mistakes I made and all the, I mean, just like, it would take a long time.
Yeah.
It took a lot of years to figure it out for real. Yeah.
Sure. But like I can tell that you're passionate, and I you know, all that experience and like that firsthand, just working one-on-one or in groups with people, you know, gives you, especially from the perspective of not having been, quote, brainwashed necessarily by some other recovery way, you kind of figured it out on your own, in a sense. And like, that's a really valuable thing to have, I think.
Actually, you know, early in my career, I was super like insecure, I guess, about it. Like the kids, the first thing they would ask me, which is literally still the first question I get all the time, is like, are you in recovery? I literally have it on my page on the website now, so that people just know. Just I'm telling you. But people always ask me, and I would say, I'll tell you when you graduate the program. Because by the time they graduate the program, they didn't care. If I told them immediately on day one, they're just be like, oh, this is one more reason not listen to them.
Yeah.
But I'm not nearly as insecure about it now. Now I'm really like grateful of it, because I think it has an advantage in some ways. And then for me, I feel like if you're, and I've done a lot of, I'm even like a licensed counselor supervisor now, and I've like supervised a lot of like counselors in training. And one thing that can happen is when you're in recovery, you have a hard time separating your story from their story, right? And your way of doing it from other ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think the one advantage I do have is I had to like really listen to each person very, very individually and understand what they were telling me and understand where they were coming from. And I think that did help me not to come in with a lot of like, I know what you're thinking, you know, I know what you're going to do tomorrow. And I had to like listen. And I think that's the one superpower I have now is I actually like listen to each person separately. What is your story? What is going with you? I'm not going to come in with a lot of assumptions and this and that thing. So in the end, it helped me, but it was hard for a while.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. That's something that I'm still like, as a person in recovery, trying to learn to take those kind of blinders off of like, everybody is the same as like an addict. Addiction is the same. And I think in a lot of ways it is, but everybody does have their own unique like viewpoint on the world and their own unique experiences that got them to where they are. And like, not every path is going to work for every individual. It's
Right.
At YPR, we're trying to empower people to like find their way and like just be there as support as they do so. So but yeah, I like to switch gears a little bit and talk about your YouTube channel and how that all got started, and just like a little, you know, shot, I guess, at what it's about. Like a screenshot is what I wanted to say. But that's not the right word.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, what are you doing over there? Tell everyone what it is.
Well, it's called Put the Shovel Down, and that comes from the old saying, which you guys might have heard, is, you know, you hit your bottom when you put your shovel down. And my whole goal is to help people like get out of this mess before they lose everything. Because I don't think that it's necessary to lose everything and ruin your entire life before you get better. So my goal is to try to intervene early. And a big part of the way that I do that is on the channel, there are videos for people who are thinking about getting sober, trying to get sober, are getting sober, you know, skills and stuff like that. But a lot of the videos are geared towards the family members. It's like, you know, they're being told by everyone, there's nothing you can do. You have to wait until they want it. Like, you're just going to have to kick them out. Tough love. You know, they're being given all these messages, which if I can figure out how to talk to someone that's a stranger, doesn't even know me, and I can figure out how to move someone through these stages of changes, then that means the family, there are things that can be done, right? And the family, they have so much more access to the person, because a lot of people who have addictions, they don't even come to see the counselor. So they may not ever even get to sit in my office or somebody else's office. So my goal is to like take all these things that I've learned over the years and teach this to families so that they feel empowered and not powerless, and not feel like they have to give up on their loved one, or they have to throw them out, or they have to like quit talking to them, because those things, research shows those things are not helpful. Those things make addiction worse. And so my job is to like empower them, to talk to them about, hey, here's what works. Here's what to say. Here's how to say it. Here's what not to say, you know, all of those kind of things.
So cool. So cool. I watched one of your videos this morning. I think it was about like, what is everyone who relapse actually thinking? Like, what's the one thought? And I had never thought about it that way before, you know, so I really appreciate like the fresh language and perspective that you're offering people. And if you want to know the one thought that people think when they're relapsing, you have to go to Put the Shovel Down and watch
the
channel.
That's right. Yeah.
Everyone in their seats.
Nice plug.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, like what, you know, to not spoil your channel, but a little bit like about what do you tell parents? Like, you know, what is just like maybe one or two things that somebody who is a parent or a loved one of someone struggling with addiction, like what do you tell those kinds of people who are already feeling like hopeless, right?
The first thing the family has to do is the family has to get out of the bad guy role. And I'm not saying that because I think that families cause people to be addicted. That's not what I'm saying at all. Addiction makes families crazy. You know, the addicted person will tell you, well, you're just crazy and that's why I do this. You know, they'll tell you that. That's not true. You probably are crazy, but that's probably because the addiction is making you crazy. That's the whole story. But the thing that has to do is you have to get out of the bad guy role, because when you're yelling, threatening, giving ultimatums, telling them they're, sending them articles and videos and telling them they're killing themselves and all the stuff that you're doing, you're slowing it down because they get so distracted and caught up, like arguing with you and defending themselves, that you're actually getting in the way of them seeing the problem. Like that is what keeps people in denial longer, is because a lot of times they sort of even know it on some level, but every time you engage in this thing with them, it puts them in a position to have to defend the choices that they're making. And every time you do that, it reinforces it in their own brain. So it's like, you never want to like say something that's going to make the other person think or say the opposite of what you want them to think or say. Yeah. And so stepping out of that role actually is the way to get someone out of denial, right? The more you try to shove someone out of denial, the more you try to force someone to see something, the longer it's going to take. All you have to do is step aside.
So counterintuitive.
It is.
So hard. I catch myself doing it sometimes.
Me too. Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah. I'm just going to tell you how to do this and then you'll be okay. And like that, it just perpetuates the cycle. But like, so stepping out of the way, not being the bad guy. Like, right. So basically just loving on a person.
Well, it's the other step is sort of like having empathy. And the reason this step works, so the first thing you have to do is stop getting in the way, okay? And then if you can express empathy, now not empathy to the point that you're fixing everything for them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like if you can say, hey, I get where you come from, or that would be hard, whatever it is that you can connect to about what it is they're going through, that actually calms down the part of their brain that is emotionally on fire and going crazy. And when you calm that part of the brain down, then the thinking part of the brain kicks in. And so like on a biological level, when you can express empathy for someone and they're not angry at you all the time, now their actual brain can like kick in the right way and they start thinking critically and they start not only just seeing what's happening, but start figuring out like how to fix it or that they want to fix it. So these are some ways you can interact with someone that actually progress them through these steps much faster.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the whole world of like addiction and recovery needs an overhaul.
Yeah.
Hearing this, like everybody just like, I mean, it's just so hard as somebody who loves someone to do that. But like at the same time, if you love someone, that's kind of just what maybe can be reinforced is like loving somebody is like accepting them for where they are with boundaries in a sense, but also like trying to understand and put yourself in someone's shoes of like why they're
when you can do that. So that leads us sort of to this third little piece, which is like, no one is ever going to listen to what you have to say unless they think that you get them. Now, a lot of times people think, well, they know I love them. Well, okay, yeah, they do know you love them, but your love is kind of annoying. That's not the helpful thing. What people want to know is that you understand them. And so you have to spend a long time, like really, you don't have to agree with everything they're saying, but you have to understand their situation and the nuances of it. And once you do that, then they start to like trust you and they'll even start to like open up with you more. And you'll hear these little like change talk statements. Well, I really should cut it back. And you know what? It's really not good for me. And they'll make these little statements here and there. They start to sort of let you in that window and letting you see that they actually do see that it's a problem and they do see they need to make some kind of change. And then when you're able to sort of understand them, I call it building credit, like building credit at the bank, like when you want to buy a house, right? Because you know you're going to go in there and go ask them for like a lot of money and you better build your credit up before you do it. So when you're dealing with someone who has an addiction, you have to build up your credit with this person, ability. And so you do that not by letting them run all over you, because that's not credit. You just think you're an idiot. Like they want to know that you're not stupid, right? Like, but they want to know that you get it and that you understand why they're doing what they're doing and their situation. And like I said, the little nuances, their school situation, their girlfriend situation, whatever it is. And then once you do that, then when you very carefully select the thing that you're going to say or the piece of advice or the gentle confrontation, they're actually going to listen to you. Because they're they trust you. They not only know that you have like their best interest at heart, because usually like we know our moms or whoever have our best interest, but we think they don't get it. That's why we don't listen to them. So when they think that you get it, they're going to like actually like give some weight to the things that you say. And so you have to like put those statements in very well placed and have the credibility there for them to do any good.
Yeah. So stop playing the bad guy, have empathy, and build credit. Nice. Now everyone can have a nice bulleted companion guide to go with this episode.
That's right. And then eventually what happens, and this is all I do, like literally, I'm like, you guys, y'all pay me a lot of money, and this, I'm telling you right now, this is all I'm doing with your love. This is it. Literally, you can like skip paying me. I'm telling you, this is what I do. And then eventually what happens when they come see me is they get themselves in some kind of mess, which they're going to, like legal whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh, I remember what I'm gonna do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm gonna write you a letter. We need to send you a treatment. We need to say like it's a drug problem. They're gonna let you out of this. And they're like, yes, thank you. Then they feel like you helped them, which you did, but they don't feel like you're forcing something on them.
Yeah.
It's like the way, and then you give them a solution and a way out, and they feel like you helped them. They feel grateful for it, and they feel like you're on their team as opposed to trying to force them to do something.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that.
You got it. It's easier than you think it is, actually. It's just, yeah.
So cool. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of someone not being powerless.
Right.
Which is like, that's like a headline on your channel and everything. Like, you are not powerless. You don't have to hit rock bottom. And I agree with you. I also, just like full disclosure, come from a 12-step background, which I've talked about before. And like, they just like spout off like powerlessness is the first step to recovery.
Yeah.
To me, I take that as like powerlessness meaning like my small self, my like lower ego, or me and my addiction is powerless. But through recovery and whatever I do to get to recovery, like I gain power to stay sober and to live a happy, healthy life. But like, I would love to hear your perspective on that a little bit. And what do you mean by you saying that?
First, I would just like to say I'm actually a huge 12-step fan. I actually I've been to lots of 12-step meetings.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan. I have tons of friends here in recovery, most of them 12-step recovery. Big fan. When I hear the word powerlessness, it's really just, in my mind, what it is the person's going to go through years usually of trying to manage whatever that addiction is, gambling, drugs, sex, whatever, right? All I'm saying is you're not going to manage it. You're not going to use less, at least not more than a day or two. You're not going to cut it back. You're not going to get it under control. So there is that component of powerlessness. Like once you can realize like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to cut it back, I'm not gonna be able to manage it, I'm not gonna be able to switch to beer, not vodka, like all the things, I call it bargaining. That's all you got to realize. Other than that, you have every bit of power.
Yeah.
Other than that, you control everything else. It's just this one thing. It's just coming to terms with like, and it's really not even I can't control this. I can't control it the way I've wanted to control. Right? Because it just doesn't work. Like you activate, there's a lot of brain reasons and all that kind of stuff behind why that is. But there's a lot that people can do to help themselves. There's a lot that people can do to help their family members. And I think we just got to get away from this idea of like, well, you're just going to have to let it roll and hopefully they'll figure it out before they die. Like that's your kid. Like that's not an acceptable answer when that's your kid,
I see just like working with people in recovery or trying to be in recovery. Like I find so many people, in my opinion, get hung up on like powerlessness over everything. And like, even when they've been sober for a while, just their self-esteem gets beaten down so much that people still beat themselves up in their heads about everything. Like I was so messed up for so long and I mess up all the time and blah blah blah, and like, but yeah, self-esteem is like taking the power back.
Right.
Right.
I'm glad you said that, because I feel like in most cases, for the most part, people need to be built up enough to believe that they can beat something, not tore down. Now, there are some irrational thoughts and some denial things that people have to look at, and you do have to sort of like confront some irrational, unproductive thinking. But other than that, they really need to be built up into like, dude, this isn't more powerful than you. You got this. Like, there's like, let's try this, let's try that. Like, let's do it this way, that way. We will do it every which way until we figure it out. Like, and then they feel stronger when you're telling someone that they can't and they don't, and that it just, to me, it just goes in the wrong direction as far as a message, an overall message.
I always talk about, like, and you'll hear this a lot if you're around 12 step, but yeah, like, we get self-esteem by doing esteemable acts.
I love that. I agree completely.
Just it's like sometimes the action comes before the thinking, and like that's why we need other people sometimes with outside brains that are not in the thick of it, right? to help direct our actions, which will then start to literally change your thinking. At least that's been my experience. Like, you just do it anyways, despite the fear, despite the you know, being overwhelmed or thinking you can't, despite the feeling powerless.
Right. I completely agree. And I'm like a big 12-step fan. I believe everything about the steps. Sometimes the wording is so old school though. It reminds me of like when you're in senior English and you're reading Shakespeare and you're like, I know this is English, but is it really? Like, I don't, what the, you know, it's like the words aren't confused. And I think sometimes it's just a translation issue. And like you're saying, people get hung up on words and then they get stuck, and it's just really like a semantics thing or a translation thing more than anything else.
Yeah. There's a lot of freedom in recovery, you know, to kind of make it your own, and that's the beauty of it. And if I were to have personally any like message for somebody trying to find their way or get sober or whatever, it would be just that, like, it doesn't have to be this tiny little box that you have to fit yourself into perfectly. Like, there's room to be yourself and to like do what feels right within being sober. But yeah.
Right, you can customize it any way you want. There's only one piece you can't customize, and that's the piece where you try to change that one rule we just talked about, which is thinking you can do less. You can control that one thing differently. As long as you don't try to customize that little piece of it, you customize everything about it.
Exactly.
That one little piece has to stick.
That one little piece, very important. Glad you reiterated that. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today, Amber. I mean, I'm sure we could go on and on, but yeah, is there anything else you wanted to add for, you know, people to hear?
The only other thing, and you mentioned it before, but you know, I have a really strong message about you don't have to hit bottom. And I think it's really important for people to hear. The reason is because I've literally heard people who were sober doing good, and then they're like, I don't really think I've hit my bottom.
Yeah.
Or they'll say stupid things like, I don't think I really did this for me. I'm like, dude, you're doing it. Who cares? Like, and they'll literally relapse because they believe these thoughts that are just sort of like saying sometimes that are like drilled, which really have no proof evidence anywhere of, but we, you know, heard it passed down, you know, from generation to generation, so we just believe it. But that's not true at all. You can stop whenever you decide you've had enough. I like to say all you have to do is know you will hit a bottom. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't have to get there. You just have to know you will.
There's always another bottom, in my opinion, until you end up in the ground. Like, you know.
Right. Most people hit a bunch of bottoms. Like when I worked in detox, I would say, I want you to think of like the worst thing that ever happened to you because of your drug use. So you don't have to say it, just think it. Then I would say, now raise your hand if you use after that. Every single hand. So I'm like, you see, this ain't real. Like, that bad things can kind of give you like a wake up moment, but that doesn't make you stop.
Yeah. Thanks again. Thanks for reiterating that one too. Yeah, well, this has been wonderful. Thanks for talking with me again, Amber. You guys,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, put the shovel down is Amber's channel. I'm sure you're on Instagram and all that as well. What's your Instagram handle?
I think it is Addiction Recovery Help.
Cool. I would not have guessed that, so I'm glad I asked. Yeah, and if anyone's interested in young people in recovery resources, youngpeopleinrecovery.org. There may be a chapter near you. You can start a chapter if you want. We always want volunteers. And there's plenty of online resources. We have all recovery meetings every Wednesday that are national on Zoom, and there's some really cool people to meet there. But that's all I have to say. And thanks again, everyone.